Hello, my name is Cerretani, and my project is looking at the mental health of collegiate athletes. So mental health in student athletes is a very prevalent issue. According to the National Institute of Health, 1 in 5 adults suffer from a mental health struggle. Athletes at a university are typically above the age of 18, meaning that they are an adult. So this goes to show that this is a prominent issue amongst colleges' campuses, not to exclude Longwood University. According to the National Collegiate Athletics Association, as of 2022, there were over 520,000 collegiate athletes, and at Longwood University, there are about 252 student athletes. Although these students are also athletes, they still endure the same struggles as everyday students do, such as the stress of a test, a big homework assignment, or other tasks that can be stressful. As shown by my intervention map, the goal of this project is to evaluate how aware of mental health resources collegiate athletes are, and also how they feel that being a collegiate athlete impacts their mental health and well-being. Another goal is to talk to different stakeholders across the campus and share with them my project and potential interventions that I proposed and planned out. So you can see in this intervention map how different topics interact with each other and how the stakeholders interact with the different interventions. So my first proposed solution is that CAPS, which is our counseling and psychological services at Longwood, would go to student athletes' practices or lifts once a semester in order to perform a de-stress or mindfulness activity. And this intervention is extremely feasible because it involves minimal resources, and the athletes are already mandated to be at practice, so the attendance rate would be 100%. I know as a student athlete myself, it can be very hard when you have to go to something outside of the already mandated 20 hours or 8 hours a week. So if they was already at a practice, then this can make it easier for student athletes to be able to attend. The main thing that would be needed for this intervention would be a member of the counseling and psychological services team in an activity, which can be of no cost, such as a mindfulness video. This would bring awareness and knowledge about CAPS to student athletes and show them what resources CAPS can provide, as well as provide them with a useful activity for their mental health. My second intervention is that the coaches of the college teams would implement even 30 minutes to 1 hour a week during 20 hours in order to do an activity such as a team walk or yoga session that is outside the normal activity of the team sport. This requires no resources. It would only take away 30 minutes to 1 hour per week out of the 20 hours that the coach have to mandate activities. And I know during the off season that coaches often don't even go up to the 20 hours or the 8 hours a week. So this is much more feasible in the off season. This can help student athletes to still be with their team, but focus on relaxing and enjoying time with their teammates outside of the stress of their sport. My third intervention is that Hannah Ledger, who is the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Mental Health and Wellness, would host workshops for student athletes or obtain a guest speaker to present to the athletes, again, just once a semester. This intervention would just need a space for the workshops to take place or for the guest speaker to speak to the athletes, and whatever materials are needed for the intervention, such as coloring pages or a video to do yoga or a paper for athletes to journal on, which is very low cost and extremely feasible. If the intervention involved a guest speaker, then the resources would involve more money because guest speakers can be costly. So this would have to be something that would most likely have to be put into the budget and would not be able to be implemented as soon as such a simple workshop as journaling or a yoga session or a coloring de-stress event. This would help athletes to have a safe environment to de-stress, and if it was a guest speaker, it could provide them with outside information that can be beneficial for their knowledge around mental health. As shown in the goals of my logic model, all of these interventions would hopefully allow student athletes to feel that their mental health was impacted positively in some way, shape, or form, and they would all learn a positive mental health strategy from these interventions that they could use on their own in their own time. And this is my logic model that has the short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. At the end of these interventions, student athletes would get a survey and they would be able to show their feedback and talk about the effectiveness of the interventions and how they impacted them in order for the stakeholders to look back and see how that they could improve the event for the next time. So these are the hypothetical outcomes from my interventions. The first one being that students will feel more comfortable seeking out services such as CAPS, or feeling more comfortable even just going to their coaches, or Hannah Ledger as the associate athletic director for mental health and wellness. And with this, student athletes will be more aware of the services available, because I know that sometimes as freshmen coming in, you're not enlightened to all the possible services. So this can be really beneficial for that. And CAPS and athletics will also have more of an interaction with each other, because mental health is such a prominent issue within athletics. It's really important that our counseling and psychological services also interacts with athletics. And as shown by the survey, student athletes will report better mental health outcomes and status, and athletics will receive feedback as to how they can better assist their student athletes with mental health struggles. And there's nothing better than getting the feedback directly from the source, which is the student athletes. So the first stakeholder that I met with was Dr. Ritalik. Dr. Ritalik is a licensed clinical psychologist and a trauma specialist. She works in our counseling and psychological services on campus, which is CAPS. And so when I met with Dr. Ritalik, I explained to her the purpose of my project, and we had a wonderful conversation about mental health as a whole. Dr. Ritalik was a former Division I athlete herself, and so it was unique to hear her perspective on everything. She partook in roller derby. And she talked about how CAPS had held an event earlier this semester where athletes could come and learn more about CAPS and mental health. However, she also recognized that sometimes the only reason people go to the events is because their coaches make it mandatory. Dr. Ritalik suggested that a true sports psychologist is necessary within athletics, and she talked about at one of her universities where she was getting her degrees, they had like a sports psychologist within the athletics building that dressed in like athletic clothes and was just there for the athletes at all times. And this was really beneficial, but it was also at a bigger university. So it's also understandable that their funding was larger. She said that it is great that athletes can come to CAPS, but sometimes it's really necessary to have someone who specializes in the activity that the athlete is partaking in, which would be athletics. We talked about how having different events for student athletes is important, because you do not have to have a mental health struggle in order to take part in mental wellness activities. My proposed intervention to her was that CAPS would collaborate with athletics once a semester. This intervention could be in the form of a workshop led by CAPS, or a member of CAPS going to each team's practice once a semester for 30 minutes to 1 hour. During this time, they could take the team through a mindfulness activity and explain to them exactly what CAPS is and the different resources that they can provide. She said that even if the team practiced outside of the hours of CAPS, if they were aware of this beforehand, then one member would be able to accommodate to this and go to a practice outside of their scheduled hours, and it would be not a big deal at all. She thought that this intervention was very feasible, and that she would like to circle back to see if we could truly implement it. The second stakeholder that I met with was Coach Dwayne Hicks. He is assistant women's lacrosse coach at Longwood University. Coach Hicks has over 45 years of experience in athletics and was a former Division I player himself at Notre Dame. He has coached at different universities and seen many different settings within athletics on the boys and girls sides of athletics as well. He said that at his previous school, they had mental health sessions twice a year where the entire team would meet with a sports psychologist for 3 hours and no coaches would be present. He also said that his team went on a weekend retreat where there was no lacrosse and no phones, so that the team could be present with each other. He said that the no phones part was a struggle for the athletes at first. When they reflected, they really saw the value of it. My proposed intervention to Coach Hicks was that coaches would dedicate 30 minutes to 1 hour each week to some type of mental health activity for their team, whether this was a team walk, a team dinner, a yoga session, or really just anything that does not involve the sport and allows a student athlete to take their minds off the stressor of performing well in their sport in school. The reason that I said this intervention should be during already scheduled time for the team is because student athletes endure an extremely hectic schedule already, and so if they're asked to attend an outside event, they're less likely to go. But if the activity is already during a mandated time, then they have to be there, and hopefully they'll be able to enjoy it more and gain more benefits from it. Some other ideas that Coach Hicks had that could be implemented were team dinners, a team watch party, or information sessions, because freshmen that come in are less likely to be aware of the resources that are available to them since they are newer to the community. And this is also beneficial for people who are transfers, such as myself. I know coming into a new university, I was less aware of resources, and something like this would have been extremely beneficial. He did say that this intervention would be more feasible if it was undertaken in the off-season, because during the season, it is hard to dedicate hours to anything but games, lifts, practices, and film because of the busy schedule. Coach Hicks talked about how mental health is something that everyone struggles with, and so this is really important to have conversations around this topic and help the athletes to the best of everyone's ability. And this was really special to hear from a coach's perspective because they do care about us, but it can be really hard for them to have time to implement things in their already mandated hours, especially during the season with traveling. So this is why he agreed with me that it would be more feasible to implement in the off season. The last stakeholder that I spoke to on campus was Hannah Ledger. Hannah Ledger is the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Mental Health and Wellness. This is a new position within athletics, as she was telling me, and so she was talking about how some people do not even know what she does. She better explained her role to me. She does counseling sessions with student athletes and has a lot of ideas for the future as well. My intervention that I proposed to her was that I would like to have workshops at least once a semester that were put on for student athletes. These events could be something as simple as a de-stress event where an athlete could color or journal. I also proposed the idea of a guest speaker, such as a sports psychologist, who could come in and talk to the student athletes. This would be someone outside of CAPS because we do not have a sports-specific psychologist. And she thought that this was a great idea, but that it might not be within the budget right now because athletics is working on other things that are a priority, which is completely understandable. She talked about how athletics used to have a man who they called Sports Psych Mike, who was essentially a sports psychologist for all of the athletes. And she said that since he used to work here, he would probably come back and talk to athletes at a very discounted rate. And this would be something that she would look into because the athletes really resonated with him and he really benefited them in a positive manner. I asked her if she had any other ideas for interventions, and she had a few. She said that she was working on culture and value development on each team. And this includes not only just saying what values your team holds, but how you as a team actually implement them. And we talked about how this can be very beneficial and even beneficial for potential athletes who come in on a recruiting visit, because if they are told up front the values of a team, they can see if it lines up with their value. And if it does, they'll have a better rate of success in the future, because if someone commits into a team with skewed values in their eyes, then they're less likely to be successful when they come in. And she also said that she plans to meet with coaches to talk about mental health, which is crucial. And it's not because coaches don't want to help you, but it's because sometimes coaches need education, just like the student athletes. Another intervention that she talked about that's in place is called Real Response, and it's a platform where athletes can anonymously talk about their seasons and what's going on with no repercussions, and it's solely in place to benefit student athletes, and it's anonymous so student athletes can feel comfortable reporting things that they might not feel comfortable talking about in person. Hannah Ledger also suggested an idea that has been used in the past, but it is where teams send pictures when they're doing something together as a team, and whichever team does the most activities together outside of their mandated sport time wins a prize. She said that this has been effective in the past because people within athletics are competitive, so a lot of people participate in events like these. Overall, this was a lovely meeting, and she said that my original intervention idea of workshops is the most feasible in opposition to the guest speaker, which can be implemented in the future but would need more budget and time, and to circle back with her as I gain further knowledge and ideas. So overall, I learned that all three interventions are feasible, and with my third intervention with Hannah Ledger, the guest speaker is still feasible, but it would need more time. And I learned a lot from talking with these stakeholders, and I was so glad to hear that they all felt my proposed interventions were feasible. After these interventions are implemented, we can track the success of these interventions by having athletes fill out surveys to get their feedback. Mental health is such an important thing to discuss, and I'm glad that there are ideas for ways to bring more attention and help the issue that stakeholders on our campus want to partake in to better help the student athletes of Longwood University. Thank you.